Is there a universe outside of Bravo?
Did we miss the training manual to our 30s?
No. Are they for real?
Thank God for our girlfriends. Hi guys, and welcome to a special episode of Structured Chaos with Kelly and Kyra. If you have not listened to our dating episode yet, then please go do yourselves a favor and go and listen. So we are kind of piggybacking off of that episode today and have a special guest with us.
Yes, so this week we are going to have a guest to talk more about dating. And so, Sally, if you could introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Sally King. I have been counseling individuals, couples, and families for 30 years, and I've probably seen and heard a lot of what you're talking about on this podcast. So I'm happy to be here to answer any questions and give you any insight if I can offer.
Amazing. We are so excited. So like Kyra said, if you haven't listened to our dating episode, we did an episode a couple weeks ago called Not So Great Dates, and Kyra and I both shared first date stories. So go listen to that if you haven't already, but we are excited to now follow that up, talk about more topics. And so we did post on our stories to ask what you guys want to hear. And we also have some of our own questions. So we're just going to kind of go through, talk about some general dating and relationship topics, and then we will also get into some specific listener questions that were submitted, and just kind of see where the conversation takes us. So yeah, if you want to say anything else before we get started.
Well, I will preface this by saying I have not dated personally.
Okay.
In over 30 years because I've been with my husband for a long time and I'm old. But I work with people of all ages who have complicated relationships. You know, people your age in their 30s, teenagers, where it all begins, all the way through, 60s and 70s. So I've really seen relationships over the past few decades in kind of every age group. So hopefully I can shed some light on some of your questions.
Yeah, I think like that's like the exciting part is like, we don't know what we don't know. And you're someone who, like, similar to me, like, I meet people of all different demographics, of all different ages and careers and things that, like, have shaped me to, like, understand a little bit about things. And so I think it's, like, so valuable for someone like you to, like, be able to speak with you about it because you also see everyone and can, like, then, like, have a better overall, like, understanding of some of these, like, topics that I'm sure you see a lot of patterns in.
Well, there's patterns. There's definitely patterns. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into what my first question really is, which is, how have you kind of seen dating and relationships change over the years, and more specifically, what trends and patterns have you seen in the recent years, with dating and relationships?
I mean, I'll tell you, the trends and patterns in dating change and ebb and flow like the trends and patterns in anything, right? I mean, obviously, the major shift has been the dating apps, right? Like, that did not exist before. And so that has really changed the game, mostly in terms of how people are meeting, but dating itself and relationships themselves, that's just kind of what it is, right? Like that has changed less, but the way people meet and, the generationally there are changes in what people are looking for and wanting in relationships today too, right? Like years ago, it was, I need to find a husband and I need to get married and I need to, get my MRS degree. That has shifted completely. And so I think women have so much more power and more say now. And like, I love that part of the change, right? I would say that's a good change for sure.
Now, with that change, do you ever encounter like relationships where because women have more power that the men that they are in relationships with kind of like don't celebrate that change.
Yes. And when the men don't celebrate that change, I think that's information that these women need to have, right? We want the men to grow and evolve and mature in the same way the women are, right? We don't want it to be competitive. We want it to be a relationship. So you need to be always, in my opinion, looking for someone who's looking for what you want also. It has to be mutual. I would say, it's much more important these days for women to trust and recognize and realize they have a say. They can be choosy and picky. And I think that's probably one of the newest patterns I'm seeing emerge, mostly from people your generation. I would say your generation, what are you guys, the millennials? Are you millennials?
Yeah.
I would say the millennials are the very first generation where you are standing up and saying, no, this is what we want, and this is what we will accept, and this is what we won't accept. And so that's a major shift and in a really healthy way, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
go millennials.
Yeah. And then what is like something that like you wish more people knew about relationships?
Ugh. Okay. Do you ready for me to get started on this tangent? Okay.
Yes.
People always say, what am I looking for? What are my, what's perfect on paper, right? And they list things like, ambition or, kindness or looks, or if they're close with their family. And those are all, important. You have to care about what's important to each person. But the one thing I want every single person on this podcast to learn is the number one thing you should always be looking for in a partner, male or female, is emotional intelligence. Without that, the whole relationship is probably on shaky ground. And that's a big deal.
When you say emotional intelligence, because some people might not know what you mean by that, like what are some examples?
Yeah. So, people talk about intelligence all the time. And if you know anything about psychology, or if you're, read up on pop psychology, kind of all the new research shows that, intellectual intelligence, like IQ, that is just a very teeny tiny part of intelligence, right? There's creative intelligence, musical intelligence, right? But my most important one is emotional intelligence, which means that a person is aware of their feelings, understands what triggers them, what gets them amped up, upset, angry, frustrated, and knows how to manage their own feelings and emotions, right? So that really is the panacea for everything. Because when you talk about addiction, when you talk about, relationships that are super conflictual or super toxic, right? Chances are, and in my experience, one or both people in that relationship are emotionally immature. So they can't manage their emotions, they don't understand their emotions, and they typically just like puke them out on, their partners, their family, their friend, everyone else. You have friends like that, I'm sure, and you've probably been on dates like that. But so from the youngest of young clients I say, I don't care what you put on your list of I need this in my partner, but emotional intelligence has to be at the top.
And have you found that like when brought to someone's attention, like if they do like lack that, are there situations, I mean, I'm sure there's both, but are people capable of learning it?
Yes.
Or
Yes. It's not like you're smart or dumb. It's not like that. And even with intelligence, IQ, right? What we know about the brain, and I don't mean to get into like a sciencey tech thing here, but what we learn and know about the brain now, which is cool, is that it's elastic and plastic, and we can learn and grow and create new pathways. So yes, people are capable of becoming emotionally intelligent. People are capable of growing up, evolving, learning. Like nobody's born with emotional intelligence, right? It's taught, it's modeled, it's practiced. So there's hope for everyone, but like anything in life, that person needs to recognize they're struggling with their emotional intelligence and needs to want to do better. And I think that's usually the problem, right? Because anyone can do it. It's a very important skill. And I say, let's teach those young men how to be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something that I would love to hear more about is kind of the perspective of what the dating world is like right now from a single man in their 30s, because we obviously are women in our 30s that are experiencing the dating world, and we know what it's like for us and for our girlfriends going through it and things like that. But I would love to know what it's like for a man that's like seeking a relationship, not just like hookups and things like that, but kind of what experiences they are having or how they are seeing it. Because I know for me personally, I mean, at least this past year, I didn't do dating apps because I was doing them for several years and just having bad experiences, and I'm just exhausted by it, to be honest. I really didn't date this past year because I just got to the point where I'm like just over it.
Scarred by every date.
Yeah, so I'm like, I'd rather just be single than,
Totally.
I mean, just over it.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, and I have heard similar experiences from my other girlfriends who are just kind of like, ugh, I'm just over this. And I'm just wondering, like, what men are experiencing that, like, are truly seeking, like, a relationship.
I think it's a very difficult question because I would not tell you in my experience there are a million men in their 30s seeking a relationship. I think what I'm seeing is the men in their 30s are taking their sweet time because they don't have a biological clock and they don't really care sometimes to hurry this process along. Now, the ones like you're asking who want a relationship and are looking for a relationship, I think their struggle is they do not know how to be vulnerable and they do not know how to be real or emotionally intelligent, like I would say. And so they're going about it in the very wrong way, even when they want a partner. They don't know how to ask, they don't know how to communicate what they want and need. And the whole bro culture and the whole toxic masculinity thing, I think plays a role. You know, it's still not acceptable, crazy as it is in 2024, to be emotionally vulnerable if you're a man in your 30s. Because these men are, in my opinion, not confident enough yet, right? And if you're a 30-year-old man, you are working really hard to make your place in the world and probably your career, right? And that's the focus. The focus of men in their 30s is I got to get my act together so I can be good enough to have a relationship. So they either don't believe they're good enough yet and they have more to prove, or they're just too scared or immature to be vulnerable. And I don't think, unless they can get to a place where they're open to sharing a life with a woman or a partner, that it's going to get easier. You know, they didn't get this modeled for them. They still had Gen X parents, right? Who overparented them, told them they were amazing, perfect humans and they could do no wrong. And so that's what they believe. And so unless you lead with that, like you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing, which how can you if you're not their mother and they aren't being amazing? It doesn't feel right to them. It's a real like complicated issue, right? Like we need them to get confident in themselves and sure enough in themselves that they can be honest and vulnerable. And I think vulnerable is like a really important word for those 30-year-old men that they're scared of. Have you
Yeah.
ever had a man like be open and vulnerable with you in their 30s that you dated? Like real?
No.
Right.
I would say like portions, you know, like my early 30s, like I was that was like towards the end of like my long-term relationship. And so like we lived together for 6 years, you know? So yeah, like there were moments. I would say like what I struggle with is I'm not here saying that I don't have room for growth. I very, very much do in a lot of areas, but I do find myself to be very emotionally intelligent. And it is really difficult for me with men because I do see it. And I do like prompt a question or say like, or like Kelly and I were talking about how like in our dating episode, how like if like we're just in a regular conversation, they're like, whoa, like I just thought we were getting to know each other. And it's like, yeah, we are getting to know each other. Like I feel like men are so quick to like jump to these extremes when it's like, no, I'm letting you know like something that I have a problem with, and I'm not even telling you come up with a solution. I'm giving you a solution, and then your response to me is like, well, I don't do that. And it's like, okay, well,
So unwilling to grow, unwilling to adjust, right? Rigid in their behaviors, rigid in their responses. It's hard. It's very difficult. And, you know, I really believe that if you can meet someone who is open to wanting to know what you need and not being defensive. Defensiveness is like your first red flag, right? Defensiveness is like, okay, this person is gonna behave the way they've always behaved and may not be open to even hearing what I need.
Yeah.
But
I feel like
you can continue to emotionally grow and develop, and I'm still growing, right? Like I'm still learning about myself too, and what I react and respond to and how and why. You know, like you just want someone who's open-minded, not defensive, and also willing to be wrong or wanting your input, right? I think that's so important in a relationship. It has to be mutual.
And I do think it like then goes back to what you had said earlier about like that men, like as much as they want to acknowledge that times have changed and women are intelligent and are successful and are leaders, like there is this thing that is like innately instilled in them that like they do have that like conflict with, you know, where it's like if you show so much independence, like they're just like, you don't know what you're talking about, or like we don't do the same thing, so like you don't get it, and like that's fucking annoying to me too.
Yeah, because it's their confidence. Like I'm saying, like if you think about it, you know how, I mean, it's sort of similar to dating, but you think of the whole mean girl thing, right? When people are not kind or when people are defensive or when people are reactive, it's usually insecurity, right? And lack of confidence. And so you need someone who knows who they are, who feels pretty good about who they are. And that's, you know, 30 is still young. It's hard to get there in your 30s. So, you know,
And I hear it from my clients too, like my clients that are 40s, 50s, that are 60s that are dating. They're like, when are these men going to grow up? Like,
oh yeah,
it's like every generation, like that we speak about, like, you know, like women speaking to one another. It's like still like every age group is dealing with the same issues with men. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, and I do know like San Diego is known for like saying like we have Peter Pan syndrome here, you know, because like these men do not want to grow up and like they have the lifestyle of the beach. There's like, you know, beautiful women everywhere. There's always something new going on and like they don't ever want to grow up.
That tracks.
The thing that I'm like, that I get frustrated with, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, is like, I feel so like in my career, I'm very like confident and I work really hard to excel in my career and I feel good about my career. And so in some people say like, and kind of to go off of what you were just talking about, was like men feel like intimidated by someone who like is a woman that's like that, which obviously that would never be like my man to begin with. Like I would never be with a man who felt that way about a woman, because I am career oriented. And even when I do eventually get married, like I still want to work, and that like I'm not going to ever be in like a super traditional relationship where I would quit working.
I'm ready
Because
to quit work. If everyone's wondering.
No, you can't quit. You cut my hair.
No, I won't quit. I won't quit.
No, please don't.
I'll work
I need you.
I'll work 2 days a week.
Thank you.
But I feel like I have found myself in like a lot of situations where men make me feel like, so because they are not ready for relationships or because they are not confident in whatever, that it makes me feel like I'm asking for too much, that I'm too much.
What are they doing and saying that's making you feel like you're too much or asking too much? Is it direct or is it indirect? Like, is it behavioral or is it something they're flat out saying?
I think behavioral, like, just, it's not necessarily people that I'm in a relationship with, but like maybe like never getting to that point of like like fully committing to like being in a relationship. So it's more like never taking that step to committing to me and like making it a relationship, so that it leaves me feeling like, okay, this is a me problem. And so I guess my point is that I'm like so confident in myself, in like my career and all these aspects of my life, and then I'm left feeling in like the relationship aspect like it's a me problem, even though I don't feel like it is, because I feel like
It's not.
they break me down, even though it's a them thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, why is that?
Well, because I think it's an insecurity issue. You know,
Mhm.
in every relationship, in every healthy relationship, right? There are two, and this is a really important point, and this is one I drive home with all my clients, you know, who struggle with relationship issues. In every healthy relationship, right? This is what it looks like. There are two completely independent, self-confident people who can stand on their own regardless. They have their own lives, they have their own friends, they have their own families, interests, whatever. And these two healthy, independent individuals choose to be together. They don't need to be, they choose to be, right? And then when someone struggles, the other one ideally steps it up for a while and takes over. And then it flips, right? It's being in a mutually respectful relationship where you take care of each other if you need to, but ideally, and most of the time in life, you're pretty self-sufficient. And I think that some of these men who are not self-sufficient and confident yet are terrified about having to take care of somebody, and they don't. And then they're even more terrified of having someone who doesn't need them, because they think, well, why, you know, that's risky, right? They learned like they're supposed to be needed. They're supposed to be, you know, so like all the messaging for decades has just been pretty toxic, you know, like we got to really change the messaging. We have to really teach people that healthy relationships are not dependent. They're independent. They're not codependent. They're not, you know, they're just, it's a choice. And I just think that that's a real important thing to recognize. So when you're looking for your person, you want to be looking for someone who is independent, confident, and then, you know, the ego gets involved. You don't want cocky, right? You don't want someone who's, I don't need anybody. You want someone who can be alone and be confident alone, but is choosing a life, to have a life and share a life with someone, you know? Like with friends, you share. You don't really like rely on each other for everything. I mean, in times you do when you're struggling. It should be the same way in a intimate relationship. It should be the same way.
Yeah. So speaking about friendships and like the commonalities of relationship versus friendship, what is your take on like friends? Like if you see that your friend is in a toxic relationship, or to one of the points that you just said, like a very codependent relationship, and you see it, like what's your perspective on like kind of expressing that to them?
I mean, As a therapist, as a person who's, got experience in this field, I always express my concerns, but I ask first. I think the most important thing about expressing a concern to a friend is whether or not they're going to be open to hearing it from you. And the way you share it and the manner and the tone and is the only thing that matters. So if you can connect with that friend and empathize with that friend first and say, I'm worried, I'm concerned, I'm seeing some things that are upsetting and scary for me, and I'd like to know if you're open to hearing it because I love you and I care. And it has to come from a non-judgmental place. It has to come from a place where you're not telling that friend what to do, but you're sharing, like I statements. I worry, I'm concerned. As soon as you tell anyone what to do or tell them not to do, you know how that goes, right? So I'm always open to sharing, but I want to make sure the person's receptive because if not, you're kind of wasting your breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. That's really hard.
Yeah.
I'm sure you see it a lot. I'm sure you see a lot of toxic relationships.
Well, and I think like that is like sometimes the problem, and Kelly, I don't know if you can attest to this too, like because I'm single, sometimes like my friends that are in relationships like don't think like, oh, well, how would you know? Like you're single. Or like, yeah, I'm sure it's easy for you to have that opinion or see something like, but you're single, And like, which like, of course I know is like just natural like defensiveness and like,
So defensiveness is rooted in fear, right?
Mhm.
When someone gets defensive, that's usually a cover. Anger and defensiveness are like secondary emotions, right? Like they're a cover for something more painful, more intense. So if you can get underneath that with your friend, and empathy is usually the best way to do that. But if you're met with too much defensiveness, you risk kind of ruining your friendship, and it's hard.
Yeah.
But friendships do get ruined when friends marry toxic people or date toxic people because it's impossible to be around them. And so I think it's your responsibility as a friend to say, like, you might lose me. I love you and I don't love this relationship. And if you can't hear what I'm saying and I'm worried about and it becomes a thing, like I might have to put up a boundary with you because it's so hard for me to watch you be hurt or be taken advantage of or be whatever you're seeing,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to both ask, like, are you just wanting to vent or are you wanting my opinion?
Yes.
Which then also opens up the conversation of like, if it continues happening, being able to be like, this seems to be a continual thing. And like,
Seeing a pattern here.
yeah. And like me, I've dealt with this before. Like I'm sure we all have with friends. And like I'm an empath and I really have had friendships before where it's like very draining to me. And I have had to take a step back and be like, I can't, it's really like heavy and hurts my heart a lot to like continue to see you go through this. And I mean, and I will admit I have been the one in a toxic relationship that have put my friends through it and like been continue to go back and like.
Well, why didn't you listen to your friends? What was happening that your friends were saying, why are you with this guy? Why did you stay?
It was I don't know, like need to probably book some sessions with you. we're still working through trauma in that situation. So, well, yeah,
we'll get to that later. We got other
I would
stuff
love to get to the root of it, to be honest.
I can help you with that, Kelly.
Yeah.
Help you with that.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's hard because since I have gone through it personally, like I do have that, like, I get it. Like I understand it's very hard.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, you almost feel like you're enabling it by like continuing to be like, okay, well, I'm going to like continue giving this advice that I know you're not going to take. And I'm going to be sad all day for you, knowing that like tomorrow you're going to be like in this happy relationship and just like, oh, I'm happy. So yeah, I think it's important to like.
You bring up a really good point, about these toxic relationships and how people get stuck in them. And it's because, I always liken it to a physically abusive relationship because people understand that, right? That is black and white in people's minds. If someone punches you in the face, you're done, right? Like it doesn't matter how nice they were the day before. It doesn't matter how many flowers they buy you. If they punch you in the face, it's like, okay, physical abuse out. Hopefully, right? Not for everyone, but hopefully. But the emotional abuse cycle is so insidious and so complicated and so hard to see. And probably, Kelly, if we did have a session and you told me more, like probably what was happening in this relationship was there was a lot of good, right? It wasn't all toxic. No one's, okay, well, then we have more work to do on you. But there's not.
Oh God, it's worse than I thought.
Typically though, in a toxic relationship or a toxic relationship like that you see your friends having, like there's a lot of repair that happens. Normal people,
there's a lot of good, yeah.
But there's a lot of repair. Like if someone treats you poorly or toxically or hurts you, then there's like remorse and guilt. And then there's a period of, oh, I must make it up to you. And then I must behave like a prince. And then make you feel special and loved and apologetic, and then that's
the whole cycle.
And you stay, right?
Totally.
But an emotionally abusive relationship or a toxic relationship is so much more harmful than a physically abusive one, in my opinion, because they last longer and they just hurt.
No, it's so complicated. I was just having this conversation with my mom. I was like, I feel like when I think about this relationship that I'm talking about, I feel like I'm talking about someone else's life. Like I don't even understand it in my own brain. Like I feel like I'm talking about someone else. Like I don't recognize that is me. And that like, it's so wild. Like I would think like, oh, I would never stand for that. And I wouldn't do that. And like, it's just so crazy.
It's fascinating because I've kind of used that approach with a client before, even this week. And she's telling me about this, and this, that this boy did and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like listening to this long enough. And I was like, let's pretend your best friend called you and told you what you're sharing with me. What would you tell her? And then she went on this very logical, rational diatribe about what she's going to say to her best friend. And I was like,
like, so you get it.
So look in the mirror, babe, but but Kelly, like, I'm not really teasing you. I mean, it's impossible because you're emotionally invested and you can't see it when it's you.
Right.
It's like, that's what they say. A doctor cannot perform surgery on himself. A dentist cannot excavate his own teeth. Like, look, I mean, I can't fix my own marriage, right? I need to talk to someone else when we're struggling. Like, it's just, you can't. You need that feedback. You need to process it. You need to process it differently than you're doing in your own head. When you process something in your own head, you get zero feedback. And that's why people get so anxious and depressed and, the whole gamut, because they're not processing verbally or in any other way but internally, and it's not healthy. Yeah
So what is like would you say, and I know earlier you said obviously it changes over the years and probably different generations of people that you see, but what is kind of the most common struggles that you see that couples deal with?
I would say the hardest thing in a relationship is communication. I mean, it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what your issues are. If you are having trouble communicating, and that's almost everyone's issue. I say, I do couples therapy, I do individual, I do family, I do it all, but all day long, what I'm doing is I'm literally teaching people how to talk to each other, because it starts there. Like, if you're not sharing what's in here and the other person's not receiving it, like, you're not even you're not on the same wavelength. You're not even having a relationship. So everybody struggles with communication, which is so fascinating to me. Like, it's not that complicated, but we really suck at it. You know?
Totally.
We
Yeah.
really suck. I mean, I listened to your episode on your dates. Like, those boys sucked at it. Like, they can't communicate. Like, what? Huh?
I definitely struggle with that because I'm such a good communicator. Like, because I've had to be because of my career, you know, like I have to always ask questions to prompt words from people to learn what's inside their mind. And I talk to people all day long, you know, so I feel like I am really strong in communicating. And it goes back to like kind of like what we talked about earlier. Like, that is also like a conflict for me too. Cause I'm like, no. Like, I know that I'm being like very rational, very reasonable, very black and white. Like, and
I would say me and Kyra have miscommunications all the time because it's not about if you're a good communicator, because we don't communicate the same.
Yes,
So
that's a very good point, Kelly. That's a very good point, Kelly. Yeah.
Kyra will ask me a question and she thinks 100% that she's being very clear on what she's asking me. And I have no idea what the question is.
Yeah.
Like, she'll say, how did you make this thing? Like, how did you, she'll be referring to something I made for social media. And she's like, how did you make it? Whatever. Like, she'll state a question and I'm like, what? I don't know what you're asking. And
where
so
I'm like, the last thing that you posted, the only thing I would be referencing.
but I'm like, are you talking about the shape? Are you talking about the size? Are you talking about the color? Are you, so
right.
Even though, like, and I'm not saying you're a bad communicator because I don't. We're both strong communicators, but we communicate so differently. So I think it's like you can both be strong communicators, but if you don't communicate the same,
and so
I
have a couple thoughts on that. So you have to be able to understand the person's communication. And now the other complication in your whole dating world lives is people are texting, people are Snapchatting, people are doing whatever the other stuff is that I'm too old to know.
No, if you give me your Snapchat, it ain't ever gonna work.
Right, like it's like,
I'm
how is that
36
communicating?
years old? Like, yeah,
that's not a communicate. You know, like, so that is something that generations before you didn't have to deal with. Right. We also didn't have to deal with
physically spoke to the person.
We also didn't have to deal with meeting people without that physical face-to-face meet where you know whether or not like you're physically attracted to someone, like their pheromones. Like, does your heart race? Like, you don't even get to experience that because you're meeting them like on a freaking tablet or phone. And it's like, so you guys miss out on so much of that initial attraction and communication building from the get-go. So you're starting off on the wrong foot. And then the other issue, in addition to this communication, which is major, right, is about love languages. And I don't know what you know or have heard of love languages. It's like all the rage in the couples therapy world. And it probably has been for decades. It's not new. But essentially what we know is that we all have a love language. We all have a way in which we receive and feel loved. And it's typically based on kind of how we were raised, right? If your parents showed you love by buying you things or whatever, then your love language is gifts. And then if your partner didn't grow up the same way and your partner's love language was like words of affirmation, like telling you how beautiful you are, kind, because that's what he learned as a child, then he's going to show you love in the way he receives it, and you're going to show that person love in the way you receive it, and that could be totally mismatched. And it's like, I don't understand why she doesn't know how much I love her. I cook dinner for her 3 nights a week. And this woman's like, all I want him to do is hug me. All I care about is physical touch. All I want is to know like he thinks I'm attractive and he wants to be near me. And he's like, I'm doing the dishes. What more can I do? And I'm like, you can listen to what she's saying makes her feel loved, not try to love her in the way you feel love. And that's a big one in addition to communication.
Can you have different, like, I feel the way that I love to give people gifts, but that's not necessarily like the way that I want to like receive is words of affirmation. Like, I don't really, I mean, I like to receive gifts, but I don't really like care as much.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or
Yes. And
okay.
it's not like black or white or one or the other. Like there's lots
Mhm.
of ways to feel loved. And you and everyone else can feel loved in more than one way. And so can your partner. And it's
Mhm.
just about understanding the behaviors and how they translate. Like if my husband is doing dishes, first of all, I'm going to pass out because he doesn't want to do dishes. But it doesn't make me feel loved. It just makes me feel like he's helping with the chores, right? But I would have to communicate that to him. You know, he knows what makes me feel loved. Like, this is funny because we've been married for 30 years and I will talk and talk and tell him things and share with him and try to be close and connected. And for years, he did what every man does, which is try to solve the problem, right? And so it took me 10 years. I mean, 10 years. And I'm a professional and I do this on the daily and I live with him. 10 years it took me to teach this man that I don't want his freaking solution. And so one time we were laying in bed and I was talking and sharing something. And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, this is one of those times. I'm just supposed to listen. I'm not supposed to say anything." And I'm like, "Oh, thank God."
Oh my God.
Oh God. Okay. We can stay married because
Literally.
but it's hard. It's hard for people because and I share that example because it wasn't intentional that he didn't want to make me feel frustrated. He was just doing what he knew. He was doing what he learned. He was doing what was natural. So it takes effort and work to be aware and present when someone else shares a need to be there for that person. And we move so fast, we don't always stop and think, and we're not always present to recognize, like, hey, what does my partner need? And that's important.
Totally.
It's hard. Relationships are work. I mean, a lot of work.
Yeah.
Disney screwed us. Disney screwed everybody, right? Like,
Tell us what
oh, you
scary
find your
did.
Prince Charming and you get married and you live happily ever after. No. Like, no. You work at relationships, like you work at friendships, like you work at your relationships with your family. It's not you get married and live happily ever after because you found your person. Finding your person is just step one.
Oh,
Growing
God.
up with your sorry, I know Kyra's like growing up with your person and who is going to grow and mature at not exactly the same rate is hard. You just need to know that that person wants to keep growing, wants to keep learning, wants to keep working. So that's as important as emotional intelligence. Is just like the desire to know that or the awareness to know it takes work, and then the desire to put in the work and effort. And that gets hard when you have careers and kids and stress, and sometimes the last place you have energy and effort to put in work is at home in your relationship. So that's why people's relationships fall apart.
Do you think once a cheater, always a cheater?
No. And I know so many people do, and I know that's a controversial answer. And it is a controversial answer because there are therapists who would say yes. And I say no because it's way more complicated than that. I need to know why someone cheated. I need to know the circumstances in which they cheated. I need to know the way they feel about what they did. And I need to know what they want to do next. And if all those answers are okay, then no, not once a cheater, always a cheater. However, once a cheater, really, 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 really hard to regain trust. So, yeah, that's a thing. The trust may never be 1,000% repaired after cheating, but it doesn't mean once a cheater, always a cheater. But relationships fall apart after cheating because, and this is crazy, you won't believe this.
All the other categories that aren't being met.
But it's almost always what I find with my couples, it's usually the person who cheated who ends up leaving the relationship because they know once they have gotten it out of their system or done their work and they know they're never going to cheat again, if their partner has trust issues and had trust issues in addition to this cheating experience and can't get past those trust issues, it's really, really difficult because you can't keep proving yourself that you're not going to do something in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times the strange thing that I've learned over the years is that it's sometimes the person who cheated who says, I've done everything I can to gain back her trust or his trust, and I've done it for years, and it's just
They
we
still
can't
see
move
me
forward. Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I think now we'll move into some questions that were submitted by our audience. So the first one is from someone who's in like a newly married couple.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to know kind of advice for how they can establish some of their like independent time again and how they can be able to find that time to do things that they, enjoy and want to be able to do, kind of find like some me time again in their new marriage.
I mean, that's so important. And I love, first of all, that they're asking about it. So it means to me that they're already thinking ahead about not becoming too enmeshed in each other's lives that you lose your independence. So already ahead of the game, first of all, just by asking that question. And I would say the only thing they need to do is communicate with each other about how and why they want their independence and be very cautious and careful and declarative about how and why that is not damaging to the relationship or isn't intended to be. It's intended to enhance the relationship, and as long as there's buy-in on both sides and respect and appreciation, I want you to have your own life. I want you to have your own friends. I want you to have your own interests. And the reason it's so great, and they can talk about this in this conversation, is because then you bring stuff to home to talk about. If you don't have your own independent lives, like, what are you bringing to the table? What are you learning from each other? How are you growing as a couple or helping each other? Like, it just becomes stagnant. So it's so smart. And then they won't be the couple who loses themselves and their children or whatever and then grows apart, right? They're going to have their own interests, they're going to have their own experiences, and they're going to hopefully share those with each other. As long as they continue to share and then still find ways to reconnect, that's all that matters. But independence is so healthy and smart. So go, listener. Good question.
Mm-hmm. And then what would you say, like, if you're in a marriage, there's children, like, so it's not just like you got the two of you independently, and like one of the partners like tends to like sleep a lot, and like they need more hour, like
Like
they
sleep
need
a lot
hours.
because they're depressed, or sleep a lot because what's a lot?
Say that they require like 10 to 11 hours.
I mean, is that a medical issue? 10 to 11 hours. I would say adults need 8 to 9, for sure. It is a question of recognizing the seriousness of it, the truthfulness to it, why they need that. If that's causing problems with the kids or the structure or the schedules, I would say, we need to account for everyone's needs in a relationship, right? And that's what's hard. So the challenging thing in your generation with the millennials, right, is that you grew up learning that your needs come first, period. And that's okay. I like that. I don't not like that. Your needs do come first. You have to put yourself first, take care of yourself so you can be there for others, right? However, the challenge becomes if two people's needs are opposed, we have to do what we call compromise, negotiate, give and take. And so, there has to be some wiggle room for someone who needs to sleep 10 hours a day. Then what is the compromise on the other end if the partner needs some other time to herself, right? Like, I think it's about understanding the needs, respecting the needs on both sides, and making room for the needs. And it's not going to be perfect, right? Maybe when the kids get a little older, a little more independent, then he can sleep as much as he wants or whenever he wants. But maybe he's
What if it's a woman that sleeps a lot?
or what if she sleeps a lot and then, maybe then they're going to have to find some compromise and hire someone to help a little bit so that they can account for her not being present or not being awake or aware. So you have to understand why the other one's upset. Is it because they're missing activities or missing responsibilities or missing connection, right?
Mhm.
And then respond to that need in an
Yeah.
empathetic way. But you can't forget what your own needs are just to meet someone else's. So it's always a balance. And you know how they say, it's never 50-50. It's like it ebbs and flows daily, monthly, yearly. Like in every long-term relationship, someone is always giving more at one point, right? It's never
Mhm.
50-50. And so, like, if my husband, for example, was having a real hard time at work and stressed and traveling, I just took on all the responsibility, right? And then when I had a challenge with, a kid and I was overwhelmed and couldn't function, then he was like, stepped it up, right? So it has to be give and take, but it can't be every single day 50-50.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. What advice do you have for someone that has a demanding career but would like to start dating again?
I have the advice that you can do it all, but you have to learn balance. Like, balance is a really tricky one for people with demanding careers and their
I have a
choices.
feeling, sorry to interrupt, I have a feeling that this person feels guilty because they're demanding career. They feel guilty pouring time into their personal life. Just because I know who submitted questions, so I
Guilty pouring time into social life because it takes away from the career, because
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, again, life choices, right? Like, the key thing that every therapist preaches is balance, right? You have to have a healthy balance in life. If you are a seriously career driven human, that's amazing. That's a priority and that's important. But with that comes sacrifice, and if you're sacrificing your social life, your free time, it will come at a cost, you know? And so my advice would be do what you have to do to kick ass in your career because that's amazing and impressive. But if you find yourself feeling resentful and frustrated and emotions and struggles and stress crop up, the body keeps score, right? Like, I don't know if you've read that book, but if you haven't, you should, and everyone should. But your body will tell you if you're not balanced. Your body will tell you if you're working too hard or playing too hard, right? Like, so you've got to find some balance for your physical health and your mental health. And if you don't recharge, if work charges you and fills you up, and that's what you choose to spend your time doing, and it works and feels good, I don't think it's a problem. But if you're getting signs and signals and you're asking this question, it's obviously there's some reason, right? So pay attention. I always say pay attention. Pay attention to your body, pay attention to your physical health, pay attention to your thoughts, and take note of what would be a good balance. It's hard. It's really hard. And it can be like, I'm going to work hard, my ass off for 5 years straight, and then I'm going to take a 2-week vacation. I mean, if that's the balance you find and that works for you, great. You'll be really successful. But you might not have a super strong social circle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a give and take.
And then a question that was given to me that wasn't We don't have it on the outline, which I thought was really good and it could be really helpful.
Mhm.
What is like good advice for people who parent differently or partners that parent differently? And like then there becomes conflict. And it's not that the other person like approach is bad, it's just different. So then it creates conflict within the two people.
I mean, like a huge majority of my caseload is, parents, right? Because there are three things that get in the middle of a relationship. They're like the three toxic things, kids, money, sex. Those are usually, it's always one of them, right? So you just have to figure out which one. But with parenting, it's so challenging, right? Because you're dealing with other humans with their own needs. You're dealing with stress. You're dealing with your usual secondary job, right, of parenting, even though it should be your primary, in my opinion. But that's a different episode. But, so we're overwhelmed already. But I mean, and this is going to sound harsh, but if you're not a united front with your children, even if you disagree behind closed doors, you have to find a way behind closed doors to compromise, and you have to be a united front with your children. Or if you don't do this, when they hit like those adolescent years, you're just fucked. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can cuss on your podcast, but
yeah, you could,
yeah,
for sure.
like you have to be a united front with your children. You can't be a united front on every issue in life. Obviously, you're two different people with two different experiences. You grew up with two different sets of rules and regulations, right? So nobody parents the exact same way. And that's so complicated and causes so much grief and stress and pain in families. So I'd say get to therapy and find a way to get on the same page so that you can at least send the important messages in a unified way, and then we can deal with the little differences. But that's a big deal. Yeah.
I know that all of my married friends that listen to this podcast want to know, in your opinion, how important is sex in a relationship, post-marriage, post-kids?
Okay, here's my answer about sex, okay? I don't care if you have sex 7 times a day, 7 times a month, 7 times a year. I really don't. What I care about in terms of sex in a relationship is if you and your partner are on the same page. It's not unhealthy to not have sex a lot. It's not the sign of a, marriage in trouble if you're not having sex all the time. It's a sign of a marriage in trouble if one person is unhappy and the other is not. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
So if you're on the same page with how often and how much and when and how, great. There's no rule of thumb about what's healthy.
Magic number.
There's no magic number.
I hear often, like, it is typically like the challenge is like one person wants it more often than the other.
And that ebbs and flows through the relationship. Like 18-year-old boys want to have sex all day long, and so do like 40-year-old women, right? So, when I turned 40 and my husband was a 40-year-old man and not a 20-year-old man, and he's like, what is happening? And I was like, I don't know. I thought this was like,
now it's my turn.
I was like, I thought this was like all that you always want all the time. He's like, well, not anymore. Like I did, and then it's just funny because if you marry someone around your same age and they're a different gender, you're going to be mismatched your whole life. Unfortunately, hormones really kind of mess with that. But yeah, it's just
sorry, listeners.
But if you're in a healthy, good relationship, even if you don't want to jump their bones because your hormones aren't like telling you to, but they are interested in intimacy more, then you love your partner, you have sex. Sex is fun and great, right? I don't know many people who have sex and think it's terrible, but there's people are tired. People with kids feel like people are climbing on, touching them all day long, and they don't want to be touched, right? Like, so you have to account for the person's, feelings about why sex doesn't feel amazing to me right now. And then you have to just handle it and manage it differently. You know, you have to maybe take that woman out of her home where her kids are screaming downstairs like, Mom, like I couldn't go have sex when my children were in the house and, you know, and awake, you know, and so you have to
That's
get
a really
creative.
good point. Like that's I feel like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, totally. And it's just like you have to be creative, or you have to be patient, or you have to be communicative. It always goes back to the communication, you know? Because usually no right or wrong answers about anything, right? Usually, like, it's about everything is specific to that circumstance, that person, that relationship, how emotionally mature those people in that relationship are, right? How willing they are to be empathetic, to give and take. You know, it's just, you're going to be more willing to do something for your partner if they also are willing to do things for you. I mean, it's like any relationship, reciprocity, baby. That's the key. Reciprocity. If you're not getting reciprocity in all the important areas, you're not really in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think this might be our last question from a listener. How to navigate situationships in this day and age in dating, which I know is probably something you hear about commonly.
Situationships. I mean, the problem, I love that word, by the way. That's a new word. The problem with situationships is there is no clear definition. And that's my concern. So if someone tells me I'm in a situationship with what's his face, I'm like, oh, well, like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what do you think a situationship is? What does he think a situationship is? And what are the rules? Are there rules in a situationship? Like, I understand rules if you're in an exclusive relationship. I understand rules if you're dating, but I don't understand what situationship rules are. And I really don't think anyone who's in them does either. Right?
Because I think they vary based on like the conversation that is current, like at that point in time is happening, you know?
Yeah, like it's like, oh, well, we're just in a situationship, so here's the rule today. It's like,
Exactly.
that's the problem. Like the definition is vague. And so we just need to understand, what does a situationship mean to you and what does a situationship mean to me? And then we can figure out how to navigate it, because until we know that, how are we supposed to know how to feel, what to be upset or hurt about, right? Like what's acceptable?
Well, it's almost kind of like a label that's given to a situation that isn't.
Is it
like
friends with benefits?
Wanting to commit to something more, or doesn't want to label it. So that in itself is a problem. Like
they want all the benefits of a relationship without having to actually like have the responsibility of being in a relationship.
Then I call BS on situationships, right? Because like that's not a thing. That's like, I want my cake and
your cake too.
Yeah. No. Not
yeah. So don't navigate them. Just avoid.
just navigate right on out of there.
Just piece out of a situationship. And tell them to call you back when they're ready for a different phase of relationship.
Exactly.
That's good advice that I should take.
Well, you guys need a lot of advice, because from your shows, that dating in your 30s is it's a rough go. I mean, I don't envy you guys. I think there are definitely emotionally mature people out there. You have to look for them and you have to prioritize that. And even if you don't find someone who's super emotionally mature, you need to find someone who's open to growing and changing and sharing and being vulnerable. Those are the keys. Someone who can be real with you, someone who can be authentic with you, and someone who doesn't have a big ego covering up all the realness.
Well, hopefully we find them. Maybe
they're out there.
They exist. They are not unicorns. They do exist, but you have to look and you have to make it a priority, and you'll thank me, because That's the key. Promise.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was very informative. I felt like I had a mini therapy session, and I mean, I already knew that I needed
Look,
like
we all
full-on.
need therapy. I need
Yeah.
therapy. Like, I don't pretend to know it. People always say to me, "Oh my God, your marriage must be perfect." No, not true. No one's marriage is perfect. You always need to be working on yourself and your relationships, in my opinion. And that's what the key is to, like, good, healthy relationships. So keep doing all this work and keep helping all your listeners, because you girls are amazing.
Thank you. It was so fun to do this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for asking me. I loved it. It was fun.
Of course.
And send it to me because I want to tell all my friends to watch you.
So that is it for this week. Thank you so much, Sally, for joining us. And please let us know on whichever platform you're listening what you thought of today's episode. Leave us a comment, review, make sure you're subscribed, and share with a friend, all those type of things. And we will see you all next week. Bye.